Shankar got his master's degree in statistics from UC Berkeley. He's been working as a data scientist for the past few years, and he currently is a senior data scientist at Red Ventures in New York City, which is a cool place to work. I hope to visit Shankar sometime soon. With all that, I'll just hand it over to you, Shankar. You can take it away.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for the intro, Shahan, and thanks to everyone who's dedicated some of their Friday afternoons, assuming you're in the East Coast, for this. So definitely excited to give some thoughts around that. Let me know if there's any questions. I'll try to bounce between tabs so that I can see if anyone has their hands up. Still trying to get the full feel of how Google Hangout works with live Q&A, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. So
I'll be sure to call out any questions, Shankar.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Yeah, let me go ahead and kick it off. So basically the motivation behind this really was to just talk about the different the different kind of hats that data scientists and people who work in machine learning can and should wear in order to scale out their value more, right? We so often think about how to improve our impact through our technical work, which is still really a foundation for our success, but it's by no means the only choke point for how we can really unlock all of our value in the business setting. And then a lot of times it's actually not that big of a choke point. There's many non-technical data scientists who are driving incredible value nonetheless. So I will kick it off by just talking about how machine learning drives value in general, right? This is a general purpose funnel, may not be applicable to every single context, every single, industry application, but it's something that I think is a good abstraction for thinking about, what are the different choke points for machine learning to deliver value. So at the very beginning, you have, a well-scoped product idea, and you might have heard a lot of discussion about data products and AI products from people in the community. This is kind of where that sits. But in general, it's not just that. It's also just the overall consumer product in general, whether it's for a consumer, for a individual, or for consumer like a business. You still need to think about all of the things that matter as far as products go, right? Is it solve a particular user need? Is it, in things of that nature, that, we often delegate to product managers. Then after that, we have high quality data, right? Everyone knows that high quality data is the foundation for any successful machine learning project. Right? Without high quality data, we're not really going to achieve any of our goals anyway. Then finally, this is more of a ML operations or ML ops consideration. How can we deploy this model? Is it possible to deploy, not just from the engineering side, but also from technical, legal considerations and things like that. And then finally, this is a little bit more advanced, but this is also part of the whole ML ops, machine learning lifecycle. It's model adaptivity. So I've used this to bucket all concerns about can we action on insights from the model, whether it's getting worse, getting better, whether data is getting worse, getting better, to address changes in consumer behavior, just changes in the market, new business needs, new product needs, everything like that. So if you can't do that, your success is very ephemeral, right? It kind of ends really quickly. So the first three stages are to reap short-term value, really get over the deployment hump with an actually useful product. And then that last stage is for sustained long-term value. So that's the difference between a machine learning pretender and an actual machine learning player who has an established product line that, continues to generate value and continues to have consumer trust because it's, still working and still solving their needs. So I'm gonna focus on two different hats that relate to this funnel. I'm gonna mostly focus on the product side, but I also want to spend some amount of time focusing on the data side. And then after that, happy to have a free-form conversation. So we don't even have to stick to these slides. So yep, just to recap the philosophy, the motivation behind this talk is how do you drive value outside of that little tiny component in between that project where you're coding up a model? Really, the only way is to put on other hats. So at some companies, maybe other people are putting on hats, but not everyone has that luxury. And if you really want to unlock value and grow your career, I think it's super important to learn those other hats and embrace them. So one place that I want to start off is the very beginning of the funnel. So when we're thinking about, well-scoped product, as far as machine learning goes, AI product managers, I think that's one hat that is completely new, almost like a new job title, even though machine learning has kind of been around for a while. Um, I'm seeing more and more job posts around it, and there's even people in my company who do this, but like I feel like it's such a critical need to actually unlock value from machine learning. Yet there's so many product managers who are kind of operating with their same old playbook, even though machine learning is kind of a different product than traditional software, right? I think everyone understands that, but the market hasn't really adjusted for that. Um, and so this is where there's a huge opportunity. Every time I mention something like a friction or pain, that's actually an opportunity for the data scientists to be even more valuable by like filling in those needs and showing the business that, or like unlocking the value that they know they're capable of producing, and also like showing how indispensable they are by being able to like fulfill these different roles. So that's just kind of uh, my call to action here. And one of the reasons for that, one of the reasons why we need like dedicated AI product managers, whether it's like you being that or someone else, is that translation loss is a huge problem in machine learning projects, right? So here's a scenario that I cooked up, just like artificial for this particular example. Like, let's say the business says, "Can you build this like X model to do Y thing?" And maybe a technically minded data scientist just says, "Yeah, I can do that. Here's a timeline. I have a Gantt chart. Here's my all the milestones. I'm going to achieve this thing, this deliverable by like, March 15th, this deliverable by like March 21st or something." And then, everything's great. That's like the engineering mindset. Well, maybe that's derogatory to engineers. Maybe that's like the individual contributor engineering mindset. But a product minded data scientist actually questions the business and collaborates with the business to even set the scope. Because a lot of times that scope is not correct. It's not ideal. And I'll talk about that more in the next slide. So in this example, the product minded data scientist pushes back based on their knowledge of the business context, based on their knowledge of the product motivations, and redefines the problem so that they're actually working on the right thing to unlock value, and also building buy-in by showing that they understand the business. So the root cause of this translation, right, or mistranslation on the last slide, is that business people don't really fully understand what machine learning can do. So when they think it does too little, you get unnecessarily limited scope. So as an example, think of a model like the business has a bunch of heuristics, and they want you to predict like one tiny component of the whole chain, um, which is like maybe a $10,000 revenue opportunity, or like a $50,000 revenue opportunity. And then, but in practicality, like you can actually optimize that entire chain. They're just not aware of it because they don't understand. They kind of over-indexed on one particular part for machine learning. They didn't even question the assumptions that, hey, we can actually get rid of our existing processes with machine learning as well. So that's one example. And that, again, that leads to missed opportunities for you to drive full value. And then on the flip side, the other extreme, when the business thinks machine learning does too much, you get excessively large scope, right? Now you're trying to solve the classic example, predict the stock market and make us money. That's not a good problem. Too large scope, you're not really attacking a fine-grained business hypothesis, and you're losing focus trying to solve something impossibly broad. And when you do that, you're losing time and money. You're hemorrhaging time and money, chasing things that probably aren't going to have a very high return on investment, right? So that's the other extreme, when people think machine learning is a panacea. And I feel like the latter is actually getting more common as AI's, machine learning, the hype has really fully there's no going back now, and it's well deserved. The problem is that people haven't taken their time to understand what parts of the hype are real, what parts of the hype are like actual just BS, right? So that's where you get that problem, where people think it's like a magic bullet. And so the solution here, which maybe you guys have already predicted this, but and I kind of alluded to it earlier, but don't be a task setter, be a problem setter. So don't just like don't just take tasks, collaborate with the business to actually understand and define the scope of the task. And if they don't want you to do that, then to be perfectly honest, maybe you should find a new business, because that's not an ideal collaboration framework. So here's a framework that I like. So is a problem an actual pain point, or is it a solution in search of a problem? So if anyone comes from like an entrepreneurship background, or they listen to a bunch of podcasts, about like B2B entrepreneurship, B2C, SaaS and stuff like that, you hear this term solution in search of a problem all the time. It's a big problem in the industry. So a lot of times, like, people will say shiny new tool like AI and be like, let's use AI to do this, right? Let's build an Uber for cats. Like it's a classic example in the entrepreneurship world. Like take Uber for instead of humans, or instead of like doing it for one thing, let's try to do it for another thing. And that's not how like actual successful products work. They're not just like taking the same ideas and expanding it somewhere else. They're built from the ground up based on a user pain point, right? So if there's not a pain point, you can't fix it with shiny technology. So make sure that you start from the bottom up based on an actual pain point, rather than from the top up based on a solution. That's what solution in search of a problem is kind of refers to. And then, another question you can ask is there a smaller sub problem that is more interesting and easier to solve? This is where you kind of like solve for the ambiguity and maybe the original problem, right? You really kind of narrow the scope to find what problem is the real problem that we should be solving, and what are side problems that are like we can leave for future iterations, or actually aren't really worth solving. We just lump them in from ambiguity, right? So that's another question to ask. And then on the flip side, if you have like a really tiny problem, you can also ask, and this is where you can really get ambitious and creative and be like a dreamer. Is this problem a subset of a bigger theme of problems? So with that bigger theme having an even bigger opportunity size than the current problem, should we be tackling that instead? And here, maybe you don't tackle everything in the beginning, but at least you set at least this way you craft a roadmap around solving something bigger, and you make sure you set the milestones, correctly. So takeaway here is try to always reframe your problems and don't fall in love with your assumptions, ideas, question everything. And I probably takeaway 1B, which I didn't add here, is make sure you're actively collaborating with the business at every step. Try to avoid being a task like taker, and try to be a peer as much as possible. It's not always possible, but that's what I like to push. So product perspective in business context is a double win, right? So another side effect of wearing that hat to actually understand how should we define the scope of the product, and how should we define like the actual problem that we're trying to solve, is that you uncover like brand new data science opportunities. So this is like one of the most unfair ways of getting actionable business context, as opposed to just reading about what the business does, right? When you read about what the business does, you are always in the mindset of like looking back. But when you're like actively scoping out problems with like this, you're kind of more forward looking. You're kind of thinking about the future state, right? Like how do we like optimize even more? So it's kind of like a interesting way, I think, of getting useful business context. And another reason that people need to be better AI product managers or project managers is that sometimes product people think modeling projects are an all or nothing affair. Not everyone, but I feel like some maybe fall into this trap where typically product people might advocate for like quick iteration, but for machine learning, sometimes they'll think that, okay, it takes like 5 months to build a machine learning model. And on the flip side, there's multiple areas where you can fail early and pivot to a better opportunity, right? So rather than saying, hey, we're going to like do this whole analysis for you, and then come back in 5 months and say, hey, it didn't work out. Let's like quickly, let me tell you that, oh, it didn't work out like 2 weeks from now. And then let's figure out a plan B, and let's take it in that direction. So this is where you were like being almost like a co-PM, co-product manager, by like setting the iteration, setting the sort of like different failure criteria, and like helping adjust the scope as you iterate and pivot. So I kind of touched on this, right? So some examples of like failure sort of checkpoints. Do we have sufficiently good data, quality data? So this is like quickly get back to the business about whether it's even feasible. And then what needs to happen for it to be feasible, or do we need to reframe the problem based on the data that we do have, right? Rather than just being like someone who just carries out the analysis like a robot. And then another checkpoint after that is like, okay, if we have decent data, can we actually achieve value with a simple model? And if you can't, a lot of times it's kind of a red flag, right? Because a lot of times you have like great data and you have a simple model and it's not even generating any additional value. It's possible that you just don't have the signals you need in the data. it's possible that the problem is so complex that it's like all or nothing between no model and a complex model, but I feel like that's less likely. So, but I feel like this kind of stuff is fun. Like thinking about like how we should design machine learning projects and design like a failure criteria, success criteria is a kind of fun meta analysis. And I think people who enjoy like critical thinking might enjoy this kind of stuff. Maybe people who really like technical critical thinking might not, but I definitely think it can be fun sometimes. And finally, I know we're maybe getting a little bit closer to the end here, but I wanted to touch on another important hat, one that I don't think I have as much material prepared for, but I'm certainly ready to talk about it, at length in a Q&A. I think more machine learning people should embrace the opportunity to be like a citizen data engineer or analytics engineer. I know in the past that I have kind of been resistant to the idea because I saw myself in a very defined role. The problem with that is that a lot of times you're going to be blocked. Obviously, sometimes like some companies don't even have data engineers and just force a full stack data scientist to do everything. In that case, you might not have a choice. But in other cases, you might be in companies where you have data engineers, but you're blocked. You might not like always have the right data that you need. The reason being is that a lot of data architectures are designed with analytics in mind and not with data science in mind, right? And there can be a lengthy turnaround because data engineering might always be blocked by like different ad hoc requests. So when the time for a machine learning use case actually comes around, data scientists might be forced to use like suboptimal reporting tables or wade through like data swamps of unstructured data if they want like fresh up to date features, right? So that's kind of like the challenge. And so my call is like, here's an opportunity for like inserting yourself as a citizen data engineer. And it doesn't necessarily mean building data pipelines, but like being at the table when these conversations are being had, so you can kind of understand what priorities, what motivations drive your data engineering team, and like how you can better plug into that, how you can better communicate with them, have a productive exchange with them, and also like set data strategy, right? That's something that data leadership should ideally be doing, but data leadership sometimes has blind spots. So that's where you need to be like giving stimuli, being a part of those conversations to help set like the prioritization for like different long run initiatives that support machine learning at your company, right? And really unlock your value. So this is where you can do a better job of aligning and collaborating, as opposed to just saying, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to stay in my lane, and that's not my kind of role. I think that's a missed opportunity. And you'll see that a lot of data leadership are people like this. They are people who kind of horizontally they collaborated horizontally with different people in the data space, and they got their hands dirty in a lot of different areas. And as a result, that's how they became subject matter experts in data as a whole in order to become VP of data, senior director of data at a company, right? So if you ever want to be like really scale value, that's horizontal thinking is a great way to do it. So, in collaboration. So as far as like getting more technically upskilled there, I'm not saying you have to take a data engineering course. I know that there's like some great books that LinkedIn authors have put out recently, and obviously existing stimuli, but designing data intensive applications, I've skimmed parts of it. It's if you have like some knowledge, baseline knowledge of like databases and data structures and stuff like that, I think it's a really, really cool read. It kind of blows your mind and like makes you think about the world in a different way, right? Like now when you run into a problem, you can actually propose solutions to data engineers. When you run into a software problem, you can propose solutions to software engineers. So like now you're not being blocked, you're like you're a peer. You're a peer of your other stakeholders, which I think is a powerful idea to really becoming more senior and unlocking your value. Yeah, I don't have like that much more stuff on data engineering. I wanted to add another slide, but I wasn't sure how long it would take. I think I did a decent job on time, so I probably could have added one more. But that's just a small sample of the hats that you can wear. And there's a lot more that I could have talked about on either the product, business, or data engineering, analytics engineering side. Right, you could have whole presentations just on those subsets, and there's people much smarter than me who are much more senior than me who can give you even more stimuli on that for sure, based on their own experience. So will not say that this topic is closed by any means. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had today. post got an obligatory show my LinkedIn, and other socials are work in progress. But yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments, happy to field them now. Sean, I don't know how you want to take this. Otherwise, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and happy to answer any questions there as well.
Yeah, let's all first give Shankar a great round of applause and thank you for a great presentation. Let's open it up for Q&A. So if you guys have questions, feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask your question. So I've got one question actually, as I'm sure the questions are cooking up in the brains right now. But
Yeah.
this is an aspect of data science that I find is super important and no one tells you about ahead of time,
Yeah.
which is working with stakeholders, trying to do the problem discovery, part of the whole project. So like, I don't know, how do you approach like navigating this collaboration? Because it's in part like collaboration, but it's also like education. And it's really a two-way education a lot of times because you have to educate on the ML side of things, like what AI can do, and then they need to educate you on the problem. So like, how do you approach that? And I don't know, are there any like tips and tricks that you like to utilize when approaching those conversations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, some of it is like constrained by like the culture and processes of your company. Like I feel like that's like just got to get that out there. Some companies it's probably way harder to do this than others. Um, but I feel like in general, like it really helps if you, at least a philosophy that I've always taken, and my data is super skewed. So this isn't like by any means a necessary condition. It's just one path that maybe can get you there. But I feel like trying to avoid being a technical person, if you know what I mean. Like I feel like if you try to be too technical, people won't tell you that. They'll just kind of close off a little bit because they don't want to confuse. They think that they might be like either giving you like confusing information, or they think like, okay, if I don't want to ask a dumb question because he's like speaking words I don't understand, right? Like I don't want to ask a dumb question. Like how many people have done that? I've done that. Like if someone sounds really smart, I'll be intimidated a little bit. I feel like if you try to put yourself in their shoes and like use terminologies that they know, be like genuinely open, ask them like intelligent questions based on doing your research, and try to like almost like pose yourself as a peer. It opens the opportunity for like a peer-to-peer conversation, and that's when you get a lot of the like fun brainstorms, like ad hoc like discussions that you might not get if you're in a very PM technical engineer silo relationship. You know what I mean? I feel like that's where you kind of get a lot more engagement and discovery.
Yeah, so is it because you said something that I found interesting, which is like, don't present yourself as like a technical person. Like, do you mean like your brand within the company? Like, oh, I can't talk to, Shah, he's too technical. Or do you mean like in the calls, like when you're having those conversations, or is it, a bit of both?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think obviously wear your data scientist badge like loud and proud. I think everyone, obviously people know that they're coming to you because they want to solve a technical problem, right? But at the same time, I feel like, yeah, when you're communicating with them, whichever channel that is, like try to like keep that as a not don't make it like your whole personality. Like I'd say keep it as like a box. This is what I'm capable of, but it's not who I am. When I'm chatting with you, we're chatting business, we're chatting product, we're peers, we're trying to find something together. Maybe obviously I don't know something, that's why I'm asking questions. And then if you don't know something, I'm happy to answer those questions. Just try to like avoid creating any silos that are unnecessary. I think that kind of lead to like these inadvertently like um, bad behaviors from all parties where people like don't ask enough questions, don't have and that's where like a lot of the serendipity comes in from doing this. And then Sean, I just use this word with you, but like you don't get as many of those like ad hoc fun chats at like 6 p.m. on a Friday. And not that those are fun, but like if you're working on a really cool project, this could be fun, right? You're not going to get that if you're someone who they think they're only going to come to you with like a fully fleshed out technical requirement PRD, like project doc in mind, right? If they're seeing you as someone who's like just a task taker who's like really technical, they're not going to have, you're going to miss out on some of those opportunities to like collaborate and on spaces that aren't really like as technical, but like really unlock value for you as someone who's driving the project. So
Yeah, I feel like that's really important. Like I hadn't really thought of things in that way where it's really just being a person and people liking you, like your personality, because that's what unlocks those serendipitous conversations, as you were saying.
yeah, and that's the thing about work is, yeah, so much of it is human psychology and obviously the culture at your workplace. And that's obviously hard for technical people to navigate. So it all comes with experience. Like I went in being kind of lucky and learning some of this stuff, not the hard way, but like, you know, some people learn it the hard way. Some people don't learn it at all. So yeah.
Mm. So I want to give others I don't want to hijack the Q&A, so I want to give others a opportunity to ask questions. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I was kind of curious, do you find I'm from a data analyst background, not much of an ML, kind of just was curious about all this stuff. Do you find the non-technical people being almost like over like daunting, like it'd be daunting to see these mechanisms and applications that they can use to deal with their data? Or like how do you go about bridging the gap between the non-technical and the technical?
Yeah, Ryan, that's a great question. And I think it's something I didn't really touch on, right? Like we at the end of the day, we still have to get technical and we still have to communicate that out to the non-technical people. So um, I think at least for me, frameworks, I'm a very framework driven person. So like if there's any ambiguity, I like to think about first principles and stuff like that. And like, okay, what makes sense? Put myself in someone's shoes. So I would say like kind of make everything framed from a problem perspective, like never just present a technical solution. Like not saying that you do this or that maybe most people already kind of do this, but I think it's the way to go. Instead of presenting, here's all the things that I'm going to be doing, here's what they can do and why they're good. I'd almost flip the presentation. Here are the problems that we have. Here is the solution and why we should use this, as opposed to maybe the second best alternative. So it's like problem driven, not solution driven. And that way, you always have their motivation and engagement. And they're also always understanding the motivation, right, of everything that you do. So, and that's how you should be thinking about anytime you build a technical solution. It shouldn't be based on like what is best practice or like what is people that the other company doing, right? You should be always thinking about what do I need to solve my particular problem. So like there's a added side effect, a beneficial like consequence of this is not only are you like bridging that communication gap a little bit, but you're also like reformulating your own thinking so that you're designing the solution the right way. I feel like that's another nice side effect that. But I don't know if that answered your question. Let me know. Happy to kind of
No,
take it.
that's perfect. Thank you. I'm someone who came non-technical, turned technical. So I was very curious how my approach aligned with your approach to someone who would be non-technical and then speaking from a technical standpoint. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And that's a great superpower to have because you're always empathetic with the non-technical people when you do that sort of like
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very true.
Exactly.
What's your approach, Ryan? Not to switch the Q&A. Now we're asking audience members questions.
It's interesting because it goes along with the presentation that you just had. Like it's very much what I gathered was you're building relationships, right? And in the position that I'm in, I'm doing data quality through SQL and through different reporting styles for 15 different services within the group that we have. And so in each one of those groups, I have SMEs, subject matter experts that I'm dealing with, and it's building the rapport, building the non-technical relationships, but showing them the technical. So sitting down with them like, hey, this is the rule that you're wanting to create. This is what the SQL looks behind it. This is how we're going to do it, just so you understand what we're doing. And then running through, like you said, making a problem face first, right? So problem oriented to ensure that they understand that what you are trying to do for them, the solution that you're trying to create, is based exactly off of the problem that they are coming to you with. So that's kind of how I go about it. It's just business relationship building essentially.
So I was also curious on like the second part of the talk when you started like went into the data engineering side and analytics engineering side, because I feel like when I left the, you know, working at a company and went out on my own, one thing I see over and over again is it's hard to go far with just that narrow set of skills that I had as a data scientist. You know, if you actually want to provide value in the real world, you're going to have to get your hands dirty, do some data engineering. You need to be thinking about ML engineering and ML ops. So I don't know. I know this is something that you've been trying to expand, like your technical skills. So like, what's your approach? Like, how are you approaching like really solidifying the technical side of the skill set beyond just like the relationship development and problem discovery stuff?
Yeah, when you say technical side, you mean specifically like in more like data engineering and software and outside of like, machine learning, right? Or just in
Yeah.
general.
So I guess both. Like, outside we could do it in both parts. So, like, outside the scope of like data science, but also like leveling up within data science as well.
Yeah, and honestly, like I'll tell you again, as a maybe I'm over indexing on. I'll tell you how I sort of thought about it. I think this is where like you can definitely take a course or something like that, maybe, but it's just fascinating to kind of embed yourself in the discussions that people have. Like I listen to podcasts. I haven't listened to it recently, but like there's a podcast called the Data Engineering Podcast. It's very technical, but you can kind of understand like the terminologies people use it, the motivations people have. There's other maybe more non-technical podcasts where people just have conversations in the data industry. Obviously a lot of really good stuff on LinkedIn, Substack, Medium. You don't necessarily need to like really be super skilled in these areas to be a part of the table, like have a seat at the table to have like a conversation like, oh, this is things that matter to you, and this is things that matter to me, and here's like ideas based on other ideas that I've seen, and like, yeah, like relationship building, like Ryan mentioned. Yeah, so like definitely it's great to upskill, but like you can also overdo it, right? Like you don't necessarily need to become a data engineer just to have or like go through a full data engineering certification necessarily, unless that's the work you want to do or you need to do. But just like at least getting a mental model of what data engineering is, what are the problems they solve, like what are all these terms they use, what do they mean? Maybe going a little bit down that rabbit hole of like Wikipedia where you define everything. I think it's just like, at least for me, a person who thinks about things in terms of abstractions, I think it's so helpful because when you don't know what you don't know, right? You can never ask an intelligent question. You're always scared to have a seat at the conversation because you're always like, no idea what these guys are talking about. We're going to say something completely wrong. When you have like a high level idea of what they're talking about, what their motivations are, even if you don't know every minutia of like, their work, you can at least be an active contributor, and you can even move down that direction if you find it interesting too. So that's the serendipitous part, right? Finding another career path. So.
Yeah, I feel like that has helped me a lot personally as well. It's like not necessarily getting down into the technical weeds of like data engineering and ML engineering, but like defining some of these keywords. Like just earlier today, I watched a like 30-minute video on Kubernetes. And I feel like that just kind of was like, oh, that's what that is. Like now it made me like now DevOps makes sense. Now ML ops makes sense. Like a lot of gaps in my understanding were starting to click just from watching like a 30-minute video. And it's like these more accessible presentations. And for me personally, podcasts have helped a lot too. I really like the Lex Friedman podcast and Machine Learning Street Talk because, you'll have these people that have been doing this stuff for a while and they're experts in the field. And a lot of times they're talking about pretty technical stuff, but they're talking about it in a conversational way. And I don't know why, like that other way of presenting the material just is so much easier to digest. And I feel like it's been super helpful to me too. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah. And the nice thing about it is that not only is it more accessible, like you mentioned, Shahin, but it's so easy to fit in your schedule, right? Just like, catch a video like on one day when you have free time. Like everyone's blocked at work, right? Like that's a great use of your time in my opinion. Just watch a video on a random data topic and just learn something new.
So I guess we can just wrap it up there. Let's thank Shankar, again for a great presentation. Got me thinking about it a lot for sure. The next event we have is going to be in a couple of weeks. We're doing a TDE. We're doing a huddle in the Discord. So you should get a notification about that if you registered for the event after the call. And with that, thanks again, Shankar, for presenting. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for coming. And we'll see you guys on the next one.